Got you. All righty. Happy Nurses Week. I'm excited to be here today. My name is Shakira Franklyn, and I am presenting today on Speaking the Truth about cannabis with our youth. I'm excited how Cannabis Nurses Network brings us together during Nurses Week and the Spring Intensive. And inspiring conscious healing is exactly what we're doing. And I'm doing it and talking about it regarding our next generation. So, speaking the truth about cannabis is my topic that I'm speaking on today. And thank you for joining. So, I'm a pediatric nurse of over 27 years. My entire experience as a registered nurse has been in the pediatric field. I started as doing private duty nursing for children with special needs in the home. I then later was an adolescent inpatient nurse at Johns Hopkins, providing bedside care. I have done visiting nursing for children with asthma and the mother-child dyad. I've also done medical case management for children with special needs, as well as I have a master's in public health in maternal and child health. And so my love for pediatric nursing has been well established. I'm also a certified nurse midwife, so I'm also catching it in the beginning stages as well. So I feel like I have an entire perspective as it relates to child health, um, adolescent health, and really supporting this population to optimal health and well-being. So right now, I am currently a school health nurse, and I just started a recent contract um, as a school health nurse, and I absolutely love it. But I have to tell you why I'm sitting here really having this conversation today because of this particular poster that you see right here. This marijuana poster here was one of the first health education materials that I saw when I came into my health suite. I'm currently serving as a nurse in middle school, so that's sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. And the cannabis nurse had a problem with this poster for a variety of reasons. But this was a sign to me that I needed to have a conversation about cannabis, our youth, our expectations moving forward, and really addressing some societal issues around cannabis education, or I should say the lack of. So it was so interesting that when I saw this poster in my health suite, now mind you, I have been given the charge of you can do anything to this health suite. This is your health suite. Get rid of things, whatever. And my initial response was to get rid of this poster, to remove it from the health suite because I wasn't feeling it for a variety of reasons, which we will talk about. But I decided to one, take a picture of it. I sent it to a couple of friends, other cannabis nurses, and I just said, "Listen, look at what's in my health suite," and took it as the universe aligning some information to me to say, "Listen, this you're gonna have to do something about this." So I titled this slide, "What's Up with Health Education Resources?" because this poster is the only poster that I could find in resources for health suites around cannabis and communicating information around cannabis to our youth. So, on some research, this poster has a print date of 2001. So, it's basically 22 years old, but it's still being offered in a school health resource magazine for supplies in the school year 2021-2023 with no other options. I took this to be something that I needed to take up a charge for. As a health educator, um, as a public health educator, communicating about cannabis use to the public is a public health issue. So let's just take a look at this poster before I kind of move forward in the slides. And the real issue, the challenge that I take with the poster, just in general, is that we have this long list of harmful effects regarding the plant, but there's nothing else indicating any benefits that we know come from cannabis, the cannabis plant. So first off, this is giving me conflicting messages. Okay. I think that this particular health education material is coming out of the old just say no to drug era, basically not really providing the full um, education around plants, plant medicine, and their impact. So the harmful effects that are identified here: reduced motivation, paranoia and anxiety, sleepy eyes, dry mouth, throat cancer, lung cancer and disease, increased heart rate, increases appetite, increases blood pressure, weakens the immune system. In men, decreases sex drive and sperm count, and in women, irregular menstrual cycle and birth defects. I found that this list, without really any other communication about around these harmful effects, how does that happen? Why does that happen? I find does a disservice for anyone who is not well versed in cannabis and its impact and how it works, and the impact of your endocannabinoid system and how these effects are triggered because of the different receptors that we have that are connected to cannabis. I also took issues with this particular health education being called marijuana. I had to have some long thoughts about how hard I'm going to go about the wording. Um, and the verdict is still out. But for me, moving forward, I choose to call the plant by its given name, which is cannabis sativa. So my love for supporting our youth, supporting health education for pediatric population really has brought me to a place where I'm now confronted with how to really communicate appropriately about cannabis use in our youth. So I did a little research and digging. And I want to share with you some findings in this so we can have a sense of how, as cannabis nurses, we can support health education, appropriate education, balanced information that will lead to our future generations having a firm understanding about the plant, its benefits, as well as its effects, its harmful effects if deemed so, and ways to engage or not engage with the plant based on a firm understanding of how it works and why it could be utilized in a healing and health and anyone's health and well-being, as well as the identified uses of cannabis with certain healthcare conditions. So the question that I really had to continue is that with this marijuana poster, why are we painting this one-sided picture of the plant and its abilities to future generations? I think that coming off of 80 plus years of prohibition with the plant, miscommunication with reefer madness, xenophobia, you have to correct this information. You cannot continue to allow generations to not have a full understanding of what's really going on with this plant. And the one-sided picture really just allows for those to cause question as to why would you present something in this manner. So it's best to both address both the bad and the good of cannabis use. Okay, it's about informed consent, informed choice. And I'm not just specifically referring to with youth. I'm referring to with understanding of the plant for society. It's important to understand how this plant works and why it works the way it does and some of the impacts that are perceived as negative. Are we addressing cannabis use among youth with reefer madness messaging? I mean, I felt like when I saw that poster, I was triggered. I was triggered in a way. Um, and reefer madness really is just like the miscommunication around the plant, and I felt like I was triggered a little bit. So I'm just posing this question: are we addressing use among our youth with reefer madness because we are not comfortable with having open and honest communication with youth as it relates to medicine use, plant medicine use, substance use, using external medicines to cope. The importance of speaking the truth about cannabis from a holistic perspective. I feel like one of the things that I got from communicating with youth is communicating in a manner from holism, where we're looking at the person from a physical perspective, from a mental perspective, spiritual, emotional, and environmental. We're looking at the whole person. And this is where we are. And this is what the plant actually does. So, a holistic perspective is the road I choose to take around communicating youth around the plant, because the plant is a holistic plant. It addresses many things. So that's what I choose to do. This is why I utilize the framework of the holistic kind of perspective, because a plant is holistic by nature in how it interacts with the body, other animals, how it addresses spirituality. There's just a lot of things that connect in. So, from my perspective, it is a holistic plant. And isn't it important for me as an educator, as a woman of color, to hold the space for the plant? As someone who understands the sacred nature of the plant, it is important for me to communicate that information to our youth, because we are in a setting now as it relates to education that may not be brought forward in education. So a holistic perspective is very inclusive of spirituality, culture, um, and the like. The whole person is where we are and where we will continue to journey. And I think it's important to really pull forward this energy when we're thinking about communicating with our youth as the next generation, to have maybe take up the fight around advocacy, stigmatization, a lot of things that are still very much in front of us. It's important that our youth have the information is needed for them and to take forward, and they continue to build upon that information. So holistic communication is somewhere, it's a place where I want to lay with cannabis communication in our youth. And holistic communication is a free flow of verbal and nonverbal interchange between and among people. That's the first part. A free flow of verbal and nonverbal interchange between and among people, including significant beings such as pets, nature, and God life, if you call it, force, absolute, transcendent, that explores meaning and ideas leading to mutual understanding and growth. So when I'm communicating with youth about the plant, it's from this perspective that I hold presence with them. I want to be able to share my perspective around cannabis with them, hear their perspective around cannabis, if any, and really give them foundational information around health and well-being in this plant, and its impact around use for their age group. So they have a good understanding, and it's something that they can continue to grow with and grow in their knowledge. So I really wanted to put this holistic communication definition in, just because it's where I'm coming from as it relates to speaking the truth about cannabis with you. And this is coming straight out of the Holistic Nursing Handbook for Practice by Dawson and Keegan. So moving forward, as I engage with my middle school students, and they've seen me kind of working on this project, I'm holding space for holistic communication, for verbal and nonverbal exchange to happen. And actually, there has been some nonverbal exchange that has happened already. Just a quick story. I was dealing with a student who had a concussion from playing out in recess, and the way they brought him in, no one told me anything. They were just like, "Oh, he says he feels like he has a vomit." I was like, "Okay." So he just kind of comes in the health suite and just kind of like basically like lays down. So I'm getting into myself like, what's going on with this dude? No report, no nothing. So all of a sudden I call the student's name and he looks up because I'm like now running through like what happened. So I just do this. I was like, did you smoke? And he was like, mm-mm. I was like, okay, okay. But that's that nonverbal interchange that can happen between and among people where we're getting understanding to what's really going on. So it happens, it's happening already. But I tell you that your open nature, your understanding of cannabis, what your perception is of the plant, you're bringing that to the conversation as we're speaking and educating our youth, which are the next generation who's going to take up the mantle with a strong understanding about the plant and how it's going to be utilized, and making sure that we have everything available to us for our own health and well-being. So one of the things that I think is really important around educating youth about cannabis is really have them understanding the immense history that is around the plant. I think like knowing that this is one of the earliest plant species cultivated by humans is important information, is foundational information to understand that we as a human species, we have evolved with this plant. And knowing that cannabis has evolved as a distinct member of the Cannabaceae family 27.8 million years ago. But we can take it back even more, we can take it back even further. But the reality is, it becomes important for students, youth, to understand the biological connection that we have with the plant, the foundation that we have. I need critical thinkers out here, and I can't have you're not going to be able to critically think if I don't give you the information. And the immense history around cannabis really, from my perspective, broadens one's understanding about the human connection to the plant, how it works in our body, how we have our own ECS that mimics and has receptors for with the cannabis plant. We have evidence of human use from dates as far as the Copper Age, the Bronze Age, utilizing fibers, edible seeds, and many medicinal properties. The medicinal use of cannabis throughout history and cultures reveal the same medicinal uses that we are seeing today through research. Analgesics, as an analgesic, appetite stimulation, utilization for grief, epilepsy, neuralgia, and much more, as we are know that we are coming to understand. So it is important for me to lay the foundation. While I'm sharing some immense history here, we know that the history around cannabis is very extensive, and a book can be written. But in terms of getting the person to where I need to get them to, the youth, is the understanding of this plant. We just can't pop on a scene with gummies and no information, and no, we can't do that. We have to lay a foundation for our youth so they can build their understanding and then can in turn become critical thinkers. Modern history and the prohibition of cannabis. The West was introduced to cannabis by Dr. William O'Shannessy, an Irish physician, who, by the way, went to India to study ganja, which is what East Indians call the plant. And he studied the medicinal properties, how it was being utilized. He studied cultivation. He looked at how other cultures, how the culture prepared the medicine, the whole bit. Like, I am so for this. This is an important piece of work that we all must do if we call ourselves, I shouldn't say that. We call ourselves cannabis nurses, but there's a different level of understanding when you study and you sit with the plant, when you become an herbalist. You understand? And for me, Dr. William was a herbalist around this plant. He put the time in to study it, to bring back the knowledge, to have be accepting of how another culture utilized the plant. I have done this before. It has really broadened my understanding around herbal and plant medicine, to go and study in different locations where the plant is viewed in different ways. The history is not as disruptive or as negative, allows you to learn the plant or the medicine, cannabis for this perspective, with a very rich history and understanding from a cultural perspective. Medicinal use of cannabis was quickly adopted throughout Europe and North America. So this kind of really explains how it got here. How did we get it? How did we understand this to be a plant medicine in North America? There was a lot of therapeutic value of cannabis, and it was known and documented throughout the 19th century, with over 1,000 scientific articles being published, which I think is pretty fascinating. We had numerous pharmaceutical companies marketing cannabis products in the late 19th and early 20th century. And in Western medicine's use of cannabis significantly decreased in the 20th century. I think these are all important facts. While they're not completely inclusive, I like to lay the foundation that at some point we found this plant to be magnificent. We wrote articles about it. We established pharmaceutical companies around this that were marketing cannabis products. And then all of a sudden, we got an issue. Okay? We got an issue. What we know is that from my review of the research around cannabis and cannabis we're talking about cannabis prevention for the youth. We have about, the concern is that it's a public health concern for a variety of reasons, and I do believe it is as well. About 3.3 million adolescents used cannabis in 2019. And there are serious concerns and evidence around cannabis use and the negative impacts on the brain development with adolescent use. This becomes a pretty main point for me around educating our youth about the impacts of cannabis on their body, their brain, and really communicating this in a way that they take stock and they gain clarity about what they want for themselves. And it's a really interesting point. So I like to put this here because it's a place where we do communicate about what the evidence is showing around brain development and cannabis use. There has been significant evidence that suggests that early initiation is associated with some serious harm. And cannabis use and prevalence among youth is really Alaskan Indians, American natives holding 18% in the last year, Hispanic, Latino youth, 15%, white and Black race, 13%, and Asian race, 4% used cannabis in the past year. So this is what we're looking at the numbers, roughly. I think I like to use about 20% of the population has used cannabis in the last year, and around among the youth, and the youth is kind of like that middle school to high school age range. As a public health professional, I like addressing cannabis use with among youth as a public health, from a public health perspective. I think it becomes important to use the public health approach, because as you're looking at interventions that address prevention, intervention of use, the public health perspective around behavioral change, theories around that become really important, and really looking at the specific population so interventions can be designed that really get to the heart of the specific population that's being targeted. And that even, for me, falls to the breakdown among the prevalence among the different races in use. So I'm all for a public health approach around addressing cannabis and their use during youth, if at all. The serious effects around cannabis use on the developing brain are real. The human brain continues to develop until the mid 20s, around 25, 26. And cannabis binds to the, cannabis binds to the brain's own ECS, disrupting, potentially disrupting the body's normal levels of naturally occurring endocannabinoids, 2-AG, and anandamide. The ECS, as we know, has an important role in neurodevelopment, but also has a significant role in the entire balance and homeostasis of the human body. I also like to talk about, and I think it's important to share information with youth around what happened around the prohibition. Why did we stop using cannabis? Um, uh, and I'd like to use this aspect to really make the distinction around cannabis and marijuana and the use of the name. And I basically say that xenophobia is a really cause of why we are calling marijuana, we call cannabis marijuana and not cannabis sativa. You know, the media played on the fears of the public regarding the new Mexicans, citizens that were arriving after the Mexican Revolution. And they were spreading false claims about the disruptive Mexicans and their uh, uh, other behaviors, cultural behaviors of smoking marijuana, which is what the Mexicans called the plant. Mexican use of marijuana was not linked to the cannabis plant that Americans knew that were growing on farms or the source of medicine in the pharmacopoeia for the past 20 plus years. They just that they didn't make that distinction. That was really kept from them, so they could kind of perpetuate some xenophobic ideas and ideology around Mexicans. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 was passed, essentially prohibiting the sale and use of cannabis, by a prohibitive tax. So these are some of the points that I like to bring in to really spark questions for youth around why did this happen? What happened here? Cannabis is an excellent tool to really communicate other cultures' use, what happened, what are other cultures doing, why did we handle it this way? So they can be fully engaged in the conversations around health and well-being and what they want access to, because reality is we can't go back. And I'm seeing having concerns around how the media, when they have an opportunity, whether it's in pop culture, whether a movie or I'm watching a show on the Today Show, we have to be very conscious about providing correct information out around cannabis as a plant, what it does, and making sure we're not perpetuating stereotypes that are not helpful, and that we really promote the truth about the plant, that we speak the absolute truth about the plant, whether it's from an evidence-based perspective, whether we're coming at it from a physical perspective. There's so many different perspectives that we have around cannabis, but it becomes very important that we speak the truth about the plant. Despite uh, prohibition, that looks incorrect, but the discoveries that we have despite prohibition. An American chemist isolated active compounds in cannabis in 1940s. THC fully exposed by Raphael Mechoulam in the late 1964s, and there's obviously the discovery of the endocannabinoid system, which plays an essential role in maintaining our health and well-being. These are really important pieces of information that we have to share. This particular uh, picture with the ECS and the different systems as being spoked out really becomes the place of conversation that I like to have with students. Not that first picture, but really this picture where we can have a good conversation about how cannabis works, how your ECS works, the impact of putting in phytocannabinoids versus methods we can do to boost our own. I think this is a conversation that we have with our youth, so they can continue to build with proper information and they can be very curious about the plant and how it interacts with its system. I like to approach cannabis from a holistic nursing perspective, meaning education on the use of plant medicine. I think it's important that we look at the mind, we look at the whole person, basically. And cannabis really does provide an opportunity to learn about the plant, but also learn about self and all the different aspects of who we are and what makes that work the best, you know. I think it's important around creating spaces and opportunities for our youth to heal from trauma. I wouldn't have had this story if we would have met 2 days ago, but yesterday I was treating a student. He happened to come into the health suite. He had a pretty bad cut, roughhousing with another student. But while he was in my suite, we had a lockdown. It was a drill, but we didn't know it was a drill. So it was like, okay, can you lock down? We're having a lockdown. When I tell you this little baby kind of had an anxiety moment, he really did. Okay, he 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 went into, I won't say he went into full panic mode. He went into a mode like he didn't know if this was real or not. My spirit told me this wasn't real. You understand? Like I'm in tune to a lot of different things what in the school and where I am placed. So I'm pretty much in tune. So I knew that this is this something, this nothing. But his response was so real that it just gave me another insight into how school shootings impact our youth. They dealing with the same trauma we're dealing with. They dealt with COVID-19 pandemic, losing people, losing family members, not going to school. They deal with bullying, social media, racism. They see and cops killing people on live TV. I mean, it's a lot going on. So I come from that perspective that our youth are being exposed to a lot, and in turn, we have to give them other ways to cope, or they're going to reach out for other ways to cope. So we have to hold space for them, and creating spaces and opportunities for our youth to heal from trauma is very important. Supporting them to make them feel safer, healthier choice. I believe in supporting healthier choices with lifestyle medicine approaches, and really just overall communicating about health and well-being and empowering them with the tools they need for now and moving forward throughout the lifespan that will support their health and well-being. I think starting the conversation, you have to talk with them early and often to help them understand how cannabis use can impact them throughout their lifespan. As cannabis nurses, I think we are well equipped to really do this. I think that our understanding of health and well-being throughout the lifespan allows us to have a full and robust conversation, not with just our youth, but their parents, principals, those stakeholders who are making decisions around programs and who can come in. I mean, I think I was a little disturbed a little bit to know that a police officer was coming in and providing the education to teachers and administration around cannabis as a part of a full-on conversation around other substances. And my cannabis nurse self got an attitude that you're lumping this beautiful plant in with some other synthetic crazy drugs. You understand? So cannabis from a holistic nursing perspective really is taking account into the physical aspect of the plant and how it impacts the body, emotional, spiritual, the environment, and really bringing all that forth to the conversation. And then also taking into account like what these students go through, and do they really have a lot of opportunities to really communicate their concerns and ways, and offering them many ways and other ways to cope that doesn't impact their brain development. Is going to be really important in the future and now. I think understanding cannabis as a holistic medicine is very important. It's important to learn the basic information about all cannabis products. As cannabis nurses, the history and evolution of the plant allows us to lay a really strong foundation. It also allows a conversation that transcends just the physical aspect of it. It kind of like, yo, if this plant, we've been co-evolving with this plant. If we have a body system that has receptors for this plant, what does it really mean about this plant? You know, I like critical thinkers, and I like people to kind of transcend above some stuff and to get another viewpoint of it, because this is the critical thinking that we're going to need in the future from our youth. So I like to be able to host space for conversations that go a little bit deeper. And history and evolution of the plant definitely do that. Um, Understanding how their brain develops and how cannabis influences its development is very important. I believe that risk benefits, alternatives, is where we should be always coming from. I am not I don't have a desire to control the information. I want you to have it, because as an individual, you need to make an informed decision. Informed consent is important. Informed decision making is what I'm building in the youth. You understand? Like, consider all aspects of what we can do to handle a solution, not just go here because that's what's going on. Process how using cannabis can get in the way of finding out what can bring them pleasure. This is because of how it can impact that receptor, that dopamine receptor, when you flood cannabis or THC, that it can change up some things as it relates to youth development in the brain. Explore who they are and what they like as alternative to cannabis use. I think is extremely important. Again, being able to have these conversations with our youth, key. Learn why and how some people can become addicted to cannabis is important, because they say 1 in 6 youth will. It's important to stress skills, gain refusal skills to address peer pressure and experimentation of use of the cannabis plant. So from and I say understanding cannabis as a holistic medicine, I put some of these skills in here and talked about potential for addiction, or cannabis use disorder, because the plant is a medicine. Okay, so I have to put it out there in that way of how we engage with medicine and its potential impact with overuse, and things like that. And I think that you have to provide the full picture of how cannabis interacts in the body, and how some people may or may not be able to use cannabis for a variety of reasons, and that's fine. Starting the conversation is key. It's important to look for natural ways to bring the subject up. Cannabis is really referenced a lot in pop culture and television shows. Um, okay, so I will say this, I won't belay this, but I have challenges sometimes with the media. In pop culture, because they can sometimes perpetuate the stigma, the stigmatization around cannabis use, or can hyper exaggerate some of the more not so common responses as normal responses to cannabis use. So there's a movie called Baby Boy, and there's a scene, I could not embed it in my presentation, but there was a scene where some cannabis was found growing in Juanita's garden, and she came to her son Jody, and she said, "Jody, what is this?" And he woke up and he looked at it and he was like, "Cannabis." That moment makes me proud, because someone made a conscious decision to call this plant by its name. Okay, so Jody calling the plant by its botanical name is how we begin to deprogram a society from reefer madness propaganda. It's how we start to put the right lens on this plant. There's a show called Big Mouth, and it's an animation, and they have several clips around cannabis use. I think there's a parent that uses, but there was this one particular scene where this younger cousin was hanging out with her two older cousins during Thanksgiving. And so they went for a walk right before the dinner, and they were just like smoking a little J, whatever. And all of a sudden they give a little hit to the little girl. She happens to be like, I feel like she's in middle school. She took one hit and she's having this major hallucination. She's Michelle Obama and all of this. And I'm like, see, this is the foolishness. You made it seem like this girl took one hit and now she's out here hallucinating, and it really doesn't go like that. So for me, the media continues to play a big role in how we see the plant in society, and it is important to speak the truth about the cannabis plant globally. I think it's important to look for natural ways to bring up the subject, and cannabis is really referenced a lot in television. So I like to look at that to kind of give me a sense of where people's understanding is, and really just kind of like holding sometimes people's feet to the fire around proper communication and education around the plant. We know that the cannabis is a plant with over 2,000 different strains and varieties. The plant contains mind and mood altering cannabinoids. This is information around for students. Just really providing information around how it impacts the brain. I feel like it's really important to stress that the prefrontal cortex is particularly vulnerable to cannabis and alcohol and other drug use during this time. The brain is still in key stages of development. The human brain development continues well into our 20s, as we talked about. We have animal studies showing cannabinoids bind to the brain's ECS, disrupting the normal levels of naturally occurring cannabinoids. I had a question to a youth as to why are you attracted to cannabis? And I was in Jamaica last year and I was just chilling. It was the day after my birthday. I was at Margaritaville, but there was a little youth kind of standing off to the side and we were just kind of chit chatting. And he said, I said, what is a good strain? I said, what is a good smoke? That's what it was. I couldn't embed the video. I said, what's a good smoke? He said, I want to leave this world because the world is not a good place sometimes. So one of the things that I received information, and it's kind of similar to my other young guy that I encountered, is that our children are experiencing a lot of different disruptions around their well-being, how they perceive the world, its safety and everything. And they want to get away. And the natural impact of how cannabis interacts with the brain and all of that allows them to relax and get away. And I think it becomes more important for us to look at what our youth are going through and really providing more effective ways for them to cope and support them. That doesn't necessarily mean using any substance. You understand? That's not the point of the communication. The point of the communication is, one, understand what cannabis is and how it works in the body and the impact that it has medicinally as well as harms that could be experienced. Lessons learned from the research. Prevention programs seek to promote positive youth development and build social, emotional refusal, self-efficacy, and similar skills to reduce cannabis initiation. Let me just say this before I continue to read this, that in my research is that there's not a lot of research on cannabis and youth. Cannabis use in our youth. A lot of the information around prevention, education, not treatment, but communication is around alcohol, tobacco studies, where there has been extensive interventions and research done around harm reduction with tobacco and alcohol. So a lot of information comes out of that because we have limited evidence from random control trials as it relates to cannabis use and youth. More research is needed with cannabis use and our youth. I'm getting to a little rhythm here. It is important to know that recommendations are coming from an extensive body of literature demonstrating the effectiveness of substance use prevention programs for youth reducing reducing youth tobacco, alcohol, and other drugs. So that was like what I said previously. So a lot of the lessons that we're learning are coming from this body of knowledge, not necessarily a brand new body of knowledge. Another thing, as I'm wrapping up, scare tactics are ineffective. Um, we're done with the say no to drugs. That's whack. Come on, get on with that. You've learned best from honest, interactive activities. That's why I'm like speaking the truth about cannabis, straight talk about speaking about cannabis. Information we always know will always be power. Use of cannabis by our youth during brain development can be harmful. That's a fact. I mean, that's a fact. Research suggests that teens usually try alcohol, tobacco, and cannabis before other drugs, though most people who use cannabis do not use other drugs. So this is kind of dispelling the cannabis as a gateway drug. I thought that that was something very important that came out of the research that I was doing around this particular conversation. I have a call to action. Communities and families need guidance, absolutely need guidance to support health education and awareness of plant medicine, including cannabis. Cannabis use among youth and adolescents is definitely a public health concern that we need to be looking at and being prepared to address. Cannabis nurses are able to educate on the individual, school, and community levels, confront miseducation and the negative marketing and media strategies that continue to perpetuate negative stereotypes and stigmatization of the cannabis sativa plants. I would like to thank you. Oh, also, before I go, there was several resources that I utilized to provide the information. The holistic nursing, a handbook for practice, handbook. Sulak's book, excuse me. But let me just highlight this truthfully. Evidence-based research guide series preventing marijuana use among youth, the SAMHSA document. It's like a 70-page document. I thought it was a well-written document. They also have some information around a couple of they have some information around a cannabis toolkit that Stanford put together. I didn't fully delve into it, but it really looks interesting. So I'm going to go back to the call to action is that, you know, as cannabis nurses, we are well situated to have a conversation on a variety of levels. And talking to our youth really means speaking the truth about the plan, preparing a table to continue to build information as it relates to cannabis and its potential impact on health and well-being for everyone. So thank you so much and happy Nurses Week to all. And I look forward to continuing the conversation around how we can continue to support our youth around education, increase knowledge and awareness around cannabis. Have a great afternoon.